Hello, everyone. I hope everybody's been doing well during the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm bummed too that we can't all meet in person, but I really appreciate that you took the time to come to my presentation and hear about the work that I've done through the CSGF Fellowship. So before I fully get started, I want to sincerely thank the Krell Institute and the Department of Energy for sponsoring this fellowship. As you'll see throughout my presentation, the fellowship has fundamentally transformed my path as a scientist and has allowed me to take on scientific directions that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to because of funding constraints. So I sincerely appreciate this, and it's totally changed my life. So thank you. So I'm going to be talking about a very condensed version of my dissertation presentation. These are the collaborators throughout my dissertation. It's this cluster of last papers here. Defended in October of 2020. This is my advisor on the left-hand side, Elizabeth Barnes, Libby Barnes. Two of my committee members are on here, Ime Ebert-Uphoff and Jim Hurl. They're both professors at Colorado State University, which is where I got my PhD. And these three individuals here, Karthik, Da, and Prabhat, are all collaborators from Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, which is actually where I began my actual research on this topic of interpretable machine learning. So I'm going to go through neural networks fairly quickly. You don't have to have a very sophisticated understanding of neural networks to understand what I'm doing, nor do you have to have very, very advanced neural networks to make significant inroads in scientific advancements, and I'll show you why throughout my presentation. So what is a neural network, right? Say you have a data set and you have, some characteristics of some field, say, paw size of an animal, hair length, hair color, things like this, and then some label associated with it. Is this animal a dog or a cat? So what you can do is you can take these input features, paw characteristics, hair characteristics, etc., input them into this thing called a neural network, and the neural network will, through iterative training, output whether it thinks that input characteristic field is associated with a cat or a dog. So it intakes the input characteristics, right, these yellow circles, and then feeds them forward through these blue, what are called nodes. And you can see that each of these yellow circles has an arrow going to these nodes, right? So if you look at one of these blue circles, what this blue circle represents is one collection of linear regression. So all you're doing is collecting weights applied to these input characteristics. You then sum those values, put them through a nonlinear function, and then you do this for all these nodes in this first layer, and you do this repeatedly. So all this is connected nonlinear regression, right? And if you're actually in the world of developing new algorithms for neural networks, this type of neural network is actually originates from the late 1900s, right? But what we found is that with the advent of these interpretability methods, this is all you really need to make pretty profound scientific discoveries. In this case, the entire universe might be a neural network, right? No, so this is actually an article that I found when I was just surfing the internet, and it made me chuckle a little bit, right? There's a lot of hype around machine learning, artificial intelligence, all those buzzwords, right? So the objective here is to cut through that hype and say, okay, using a fairly minimalistic approach from the machine learning side, how can we actually use this tool to make geoscientific discoveries? And here's one of the critical questions here, right? Can we actually better our understanding of nonlinearities within the Earth system by interpreting what neural networks learn? If they work better than linear mechanisms, linear methods for the problems we're looking at, can we actually interpret what they've learned to understand better about the processes we're studying than what the linear methods tell us? So here's the problem that I'm going to be facing. It's this idea of multi-year forecast. So we're in, what is this, June of 2021. And say I want to know what's going to happen in the summer of 2024, right? The scientific field, geoscientific field, knows that you can use oceanic characteristics such as sea surface temperature anomalies, which is what I'm showing on the left-hand side here. If you stuck your finger in the ocean, that's the temperature it would be. On the right-hand side, I'm showing surface temperature. So if your face, what would you feel on your face if you were standing on land at any of these locations? And we know that some patterns within these sea surface temperature anomalies influence continental surface temperature anomalies. So something here on the left might be useful for me predicting what the surface temperature is going to be like in the summer of 2024. Now, we still have a lot of uncertainty, right? We know some regions within the ocean can help you predict surface temperature a few years in advance, or things like that. But we don't know all the patterns that can do that because the methods that we have to identify which patterns will give you predictability have been limited. So the end goal here is to identify these oceanic patterns that give you this multi-year predictability and then assess the nonlinearity. So this is the end goal, what I'm showing here. You have sea surface temperature patterns on the left. I'm making a prediction for surface temperature at this red dot, say that's Seattle. And then I want to know, when I'm making a forecast at this red dot, which locations in this oceanic field are actually helpful for making that forecast. So then I can apply my physical reasoning and understand why, make a scientific advancement. But there are three problems, right? And this is where my dissertation came about. When I first started, there wasn't a framework for understanding how and why these neural networks make their decisions in geoscientific applications. Then if you develop that framework, you have to apply it to a lot of problems that you already have the answer to so that you can make sure it's reliable, and then you can apply it to things you don't know the answer to. Right? You don't want to apply something that you don't know is actually giving you realistic results to these brand new problems because you'll get answers that just don't make any sense down the road. They might convince yourself they work now, but they won't in the future. So this method that we're going to use is actually extracted from computer science. So this method is called layer-wise relevance propagation. You can find this paper by looking at Montauban et al. 2017, layer-wise relevance propagation. And the general idea is, if I have a toy neural network here and I input an image of a cat and I want it to tell me the probability that it's a cat, right? This image plunks through the neural network. The neural network says there's an 80% chance it's a cat. Now, through some sophisticated collection of rules that these authors developed, you can move that information backwards and translate the decision-making process of the neural network back onto the original image, and it tells you which characteristics of that image made it think it was a cat. So now you can picture geoscientific applications, right, where you input a map of sea surface temperature data or some other geoscientific field of interest, you get your decision, and then you reproject that decision to find which characteristics of that geospatial field were actually useful. And that's what we're going to do. So here's a very simple application of our framework. We're going to input these maps of global sea surface temperature into this very simple feed-forward network, and we're going to have it tell us the temperature in that map, right? So this is extremely simple, within this red box. And if it's colder than normal, that's La Nina. If it's warmer than normal, it's El Nino, right? And we apply some regularization, if people know what that means, to make sure that the neural network is distributing its attention across the entire globe and not just within this box. And I'll show you why that's cool. So then what happens is, okay, it's 100% accurate. This is super simple. So what I'm showing you here is, in the background are these sea surface temperature anomalies. Blue is cold, brownish, reddish is warm. And in the open contours are these regions of importance, of relevance, that show where the neural network was actually looking when it said, okay, is this El Nino or La Nina? And so without knowing too much geoscience, you can see that, okay, the neural network is shifting its attention depending on where the sea surface temperature anomalies are. And this is, something we understand as geoscientists, that La Nina and El Nino, every single time they happen, they look a little bit different. So this is cool, right? The framework we have is actually giving us information that we've dug up using other methods over the last few decades. Cool, so that's one part of the framework. There's some other methods we use. I'm only gonna cover that one now. Now we can actually, test this framework on a few other types of geoscientific problems. So that's what I'm gonna show you now. I'm actually not gonna show that to you because I don't want to take up all the time in this presentation showing you things that we already know as geoscientists, right? We discovered new things using this method, so you're gonna have to trust me that we applied it to a bunch of different problems and it worked well. We published on that work, so if you're interested, you can find that too. So now we're actually gonna apply this framework to bettering our understanding of multi-year forecasting. So pretty simple setup here to show the method works, similar to the last one. we're going to take these maps of sea surface temperature anomalies, push them through a fairly simple feed-forward, fully connected neural network, and then we're going to predict surface temperature, so the temperature you'd feel on your face, anomalies 1 to 5 years in advance at some location that we choose across the globe, right? So that's a general setup. Now, the general location that we chose in this example that I'm showing you here is we're using sea surface temperature data to predict surface temperature at this red dot 1 to 5 years into the future. And what this is showing you is using this framework, we have actually successfully been able to back out the sea surface temperature patterns that were used to make these forecasts. So now when we're making these multi-year forecasts, we can input these sea surface temperature fields, make the forecast, figure out which patterns were actually used to make the forecast to make sure our forecasts are, being made for reasons consistent with our physical understanding. Or we can do this in a purely scientific setting and actually learn more about where multi-year predictability comes from. So I'm going to show you a little bit of that now. Notice here in this left-hand side, in this left panel, this red dot is moved to somewhere in southern North America, okay? And then in this right panel, the red dot is in the Pacific Northwest. So I'm forecasting for different regions here. And then I'm showing you the regions that the neural network used in an average sense to make these forecasts. So for the region in southern North America, you can see that it uses this blob in the Pacific Northwest Pacific Ocean, that we know as the Kuroshio extension in geoscience. Now for the Pacific Northwest forecast, up here in this red dot near Seattle, you can see that it uses the Kuroshio extension. This blob up here, we know that is the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. And then in the North Atlantic, we know that's the North Atlantic Oscillation. So you can start to tease out these differences in which regions are important for making forecasts in different regions. And then if you look at one location, what I'm showing you is the average regions of importance for making forecasts for Seattle on this 1 to 5 year time scale, right? Then you can separate that out using clustering algorithms to say, okay, I know the average isn't the case that's going to happen every day, so which patterns happen most often? And that's what we've done here. So the most common pattern where, which patterns in the ocean will give you predictability in Seattle is the North Atlantic Oscillation, right? The second most common is the Kuroshio extension. The third most common is some combination of the tropics, and then the Pacific Decadal Oscillation in the Northeastern Pacific Ocean. So you can start teasing out mechanistic understanding of multi-year predictability using this type of perspective. All right, so cool. That's the end of my dissertation work that I'm going to be sharing with you all. I also had the opportunity to collaborate with my advisor on this other project where you can identify these time-evolving patterns of climate change. And I'm going to touch on this because I think it's so cool. And another CSGF fellow in my advisor's research group, who's also my roommate, Jamin Rader, is thinking about these problems. So if you're interested in this type of stuff that I'm about to talk about, then you should talk with Jamin Rader. So I'm not going to get into all the details, but the general idea is you can use a neural network in an extremely simple setup, similar to what I've shown you in my presentations, to figure out where climate change will appear in any given year, right? So in this example, if you're in 1975, which regions of the globe exhibit the most characteristic patterns of climate change? So, if you're going to say, in 1975, I need to define climate change uniquely from all other years. What are the unique aspects of 1975 from 1950, 2050, 2100, right? And the regions shown in red are actually the regions where you have these very unique indicators of climate change. And you can do that for any year, right? 2015. You can even go into the future by training these neural networks and climate models, and you can see different regions have different unique climate change indicators depending on the year. So I just think that stuff is so cool. Again, there's another CSGF fellow, Jamin Rader, that's working on all this stuff. So talk with him if you think this stuff is cool and want to learn more. I want to wrap up by highlighting the people that I got to do some of this work with. This is the group when I graduated that was in my advisor's group. This is my advisor in the upper left. Professor Libby Barnes. This is me up here. This is actually Jamin Rader. He's another CSGF fellow working on neural networks applied to interpretable geoscientific problems. All these people are fantastic, so it's been a really fun ride. With that, I'll be live after the presentation. You're all used to that by now to answer any questions, so thank you for paying attention. And yeah, thanks.